Hello, my name is Benny Abbott. My company is Abbott Consulting and Coating Inspections. Today we're going to be talking about a plural component spray gun by Graco. It is the mechanical purge fusion gun. I've been using this gun for a little over 7 years now, and this gun's basically give me zero problems. I mean, it is a very user-friendly gun, very easy to troubleshoot, go through, very easy to maintain when spraying plural component polyurea coatings. This has been my go-to gun since the first time I started using it. It's just been a very good spray gun for the type jobs that I use, which involves a very large secondary containment, linings, polyurea up over geotextile fabrics, primary containment systems inside of petroleum fuel storage tanks, and so forth. Water storage tanks for potable drinking water, just all types of uses. But again, polyurea coatings. This is the Graco mechanical purge fusion gun. This is my go-to gun. I probably never leave home without one inside of my toolbox, because it has brought me out of some jobs when other guns failed, was improperly cleaned. This gun here has never let me down. So I'm going to go through sort of a detailed breakdown of the gun, put it back together, adjust the valving rod. This is probably one of the most misunderstood guns inside of the industry. I have people say, oh, we just can't get it to spray correctly. It's very simple. I'll show you some very simple tips and tricks with this gun here today, and hopefully you'll learn something from this video. Thank you. Okay, we're back here. Again, this is the Graco mechanical purge fusion gun. This again is my go-to gun for most of the spray work that I do. I do a lot of consulting work with other contractors, applicators, and I probably never leave home without it when I'm going to another job. This gun has helped me out on many jobs. Get me through the job where other guns has failed, primarily due to improper maintenance, not having a sufficient spare parts up on the job. But again, this gun, low maintenance, just keeps on spraying. Very good gun. So disassembly of this gun here is quite simple. We have air cap. We have air tip retainer or PCD retainer, pattern control disc retainer. Here we have air tip or PCD, pattern control disc. Again, this is a round pattern tip, and it is a 40 thousandths. Then we have this is our front purge rod seal, this little white Teflon seal here. This is on the front of the gun. This is our front rod purge seal. We have two of these seals inside of this gun. We have one in this forward position, and we have one here at the back of the fluid housing. And I'll demonstrate that here shortly. Again, this portion here, this is going to be our module retainer nut. And it's just pretty much just on hand tight, and then I snug it up with a crescent wrench just to ensure that it is well tightened up. Again, this is our front rod purge seal and our module retainer nut. Now there's a few different ways to remove this module from this gun. Our module is in this location right here. One I have inside of this gun is a XR2929. Works very, very good. It's sort of a medium flow, gives me very good output, and gives me very good control of the coating material that is exiting the spray gun. I don't like to use excessively large modules because you wind up leaving runs and sags. Holidays is just a very, the XR2929 is just a very good output for this gun. I use the XR series because the XRs is a direct impingement port. So I get very little of a ISO spit when compared to using, say, the MR 2929. The MR series is a indirect impingement port, and there the A and the B side orifices are staggered more greatly, thus giving you a much larger lead lag ISO spit. So the XR is the module that I prefer to use for spraying polyurea coating systems. So upon removing this module, very simple, took the gun up to air. Most times, if you just trigger the gun with the gun on safety, most times this module will come right up and come out. Okay, let's say we have a predicament. We've just finished up spraying. We're servicing our gun for the following day, and we triggered. We cannot get this module to come out of this fluid housing. So if we look inside of our owner's manual of the gun, Graco tells us we can remove this fluid housing from the gun body. And we'll take this fluid housing, we'll turn it around backwards facing the gun body. And we'll insert the purge rod into the front of the module. We'll just give it just a slight wiggle, and most times we can get this module to slip out. Okay? Say we have a module that's really stuck. Hopefully, we may have a spare purge rod. Maybe a spare one that we've replaced. This one here was damaged by a customer, and from over tightening the purge rod, they broke the retainer ring that holds the O-ring up on the back. So I've got this here purge rod, so now I ain't got to worry about bending this one here because it's already scrapped. So I can take my fluid housing inside of one hand and take this secondary purge rod, and I can wiggle a little bit harder without worrying of damaging this purge rod, and hopefully I can get that stuck module out of the gun. That way we can remove these modules without damaging them. I've seen people take picks and stuff, stick down inside of the fronts and dig them out. I've actually seen them drill them out, and that's just really not needed. So very simple, and this here is our mix chamber for the mechanical purge gun, the Graco Fusion mechanical purge. So this is our mix chamber. This is a XR 2929. It has the A side orifice, okay, right in the very front leading edge. And we'll give it a little turn, and then we'll have our B side orifice. Okay. Most times out in the field, this is as far as this gun will ever be disassembled. We'll remove our check valves. Here's our A side check valve. Sometimes A will give us a problem. This gun was used just a couple of days ago, and it was flushed and cleaned up, but sometimes I always tell my classes that the A side, it's our problem child. It's always giving us a problem. Different screwdriver here. There we go. So, this is our A side check valve, our gun screen. I'll set this over to the side. Then our B side. B, it hardly ever gives us any problem. It just comes right out. So, front fluid housing. This is our check valve passageways, and then we have our passageways inside of this orifice here. For our A side material and our B side material. And remember, when we're behind the spray gun, A is always to our left B is always on the right hand side. And of course A is always labeled, and B generally will not have nothing labeled on it. It'll just be blank. Now, furthermore, on our gun here on the fluid housing, this is our clean off air adjustment. There is a O-ring in this area right here. It's the same O-ring that fits on the air spool valve, which operates the triggering of the gun. So hardly ever does this O-ring get replaced. Anytime that I cook these parts inside of my parts cooker, I always remove all O-rings, and I've really never cooked this valve here. Very easy to get cleaned up. And then we have only other O-ring that's in this fluid housing is right back here at the back of the gun. This is their fluid housing O-ring. And pretty much in the condition that this fluid housing here is in, it is ready to be dropped into our cooker if it needed to be cooked and cleaned. I use a product called NMP. N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, P as in Paul. I'm not going to go through the chemical name because I cannot pronounce it correctly. But just for short, we call it NMP. Cooks parts extremely well. Problem is, my guns get cooked very little because I work at keeping them clean. I'll show you on another video later on how I do that. Anyway, but this is the front. This is our fluid housing. We talked about our front purge rod seal. Now we will go into our rear purge rod seal. This is in the back entryway of our gun. This little area right in here. We'll go in and we will remove this rear purge rod seal. Okay, I think this is one area that gives people the most trouble because it's misunderstood. This purge rod seal needs to be tightened up on a not on a regular basis, but periodically during the use of this gun, during the course of a week or a couple weeks. It's always good just to snug this rear rod purge seal up, just to keep B-side resin material from leaking out of the back side of this gun. Anytime that this rear rod purge seal leaks, it's going to leak B-side material only. You should never leak A-side material out of this gun. If you do leak A out of the back portion of this fluid housing, you've got major problems. So if everything is working correctly and this rear rod purge seal is slightly loose, you will leak B-side material out of the rear portion of this fluid housing. And I'll go through the proper procedures on how to tighten this up later on. So I want to incorporate my little salsa bowl. It's great for putting my small parts in when I'm working. That way I don't lose them. I also use a little pan which covers stove eyes. Old style stove eyes. Works great for putting my parts in on the side of someone's work trailer. You know, we may not have a good workbench. This works great keeping parts together, keeping them from falling off of the floor. Some work trailers or workshops, you drop a part up on the floor, you might as well consider it gone because the floors are so dirty and grimy. Chances are some of these parts that are small, you'll never find them. So I want to keep all my parts together. And again, this is basically as far as this gun gets broken down in the field. This is basic, very few parts, very simple, very easy to take down. And I do always recommend utilizing a flush pot for when we take this gun off of our gun block. We're done for the day. I like to take my gun off of the hoses, attach it to my fluid block on my flush tank, and flush this gun out thoroughly. Doesn't take a lot of solvent, and once the gun is flushed, it makes disassembly of the gun way more easier. Also, I reduced the risk of, since I have purged out the A and the B side materials out of this gun, I can take it apart without the chance of cross-contaminating materials inside of the gun and creating a crossover when that one did not exist. So back again up on this gun with the air O-rings. We have a O-ring here in the front portion of this gun. This makes our secondary seal on our fluid housing for our air passageway for our air clean off. Want to keep these O-rings, you want to check them out, make sure that they're inside of good condition, and we only replace them when they're needed. So we get into the back portion of our gun. This is our air cylinder. This is where our piston and our purge rod is going to be included, and then we got our safety device. So we'll remove these parts. There's a few more O-rings inside of here. Set that over for time being. We'll remove our piston. So on this is our piston and our purge rod, okay? And there is 3 O-rings and a spring in this area. We've got 2 O-rings here, and then if we take our purge rod out with our nut driver, 5/16, there is another O-ring located right here. And we have a spring as well. How many times do I take this apart? These parts gets taken down mainly inside of training classes that I teach for the PDA, as well as some other material suppliers that is well known. That's about the only time that these parts gets taken down, because they're just not needed out in the field. If you maintain your gun good, you should never have to disassemble the gun this far in the field, unless you're going to be cooking the entire gun, so you want to take parts out that don't need to be cooked. This section here, I never cook. It shouldn't get into a condition of where that it needs to be cooked. And here shortly, I will, once I get the gun completely apart, I will point out and segregate out all the parts that should be cooked inside of your cooker. So now we have our inside of our gun all disassembled. Now we can remove our air spool valve. This is the part that makes the gun works, makes the gun trigger on and off. So we have our airline connector, our male, and want to remove it. We have our spring. Do not want to lose this. This is a very important part. All of these parts are very important. Now we can remove the air spool valve without removing the handle. Most times we use a small flat head screwdriver. We want to use caution when we go and push this in. We do not want to damage the inside of this gun handle. So you want to be very careful when doing this. We want to get this air spool valve just coming out where we can pull it out. Now this has got 3 O-rings. Again, they're the same O-rings that are on our air clean-off valve as well. So it's the same exact O-rings that are on here. One thing about this is if you do have to change these O-rings out, you need a little tool to assist you in putting these O-rings on. Inside of your gun repair kit, or your gun O-ring repair kit from Graco, you'll get every O-ring that is within this gun, but you do not get the ramp to aid in installing these O-rings on this air spool valve. The only time that you get the ramp is when that you buy just the air spool valve O-ring kit. You should get about 6 of these air spool O-rings, and you'll get one of these ramps. I keep them up under lock and key because they're very important, because without them it's going to be almost impossible to get those O-rings installed without damaging your fingers. So this is our little ramp. I call it a bullet. It could be a bull nose. Okay. Take our air spool valve, air bull nose or air bullet, and it installs just like so. Now we can take the O-ring and we can put it on the front of the bull nose and roll it up and install, and it will fit into our first location. Now our second O-ring will fit, and it will leapfrog over the first O-ring. There's already a ramp built into the air spool valve. We will slip into the second location, and then the third will do the same. It will leap over the first two and then fit into its location. Very rarely do I replace these O-rings. I make sure that they're inside a good working order, and when I do have to replace them, I make sure that I have my bull nose. Very important little device there. Okay, so I have basically the gun apart, other than my muffler off of the bottom of the gun, and then my secondary air connection. If I want to take and put my air connection to the lower portion of the gun, then I would block this area here off, and then my air would connect in the bottom part of the gun. So I would normally take these out before I cook this gun handle. So I would take the parts that I would cook here, would be this gun handle, my fluid housing, my air cap, my tip retainer, my module retainer, the back portion of my air spool valve, okay, and then this area here, and I will disassemble it. This is our safety. We do have a O-ring in this outer location here, okay. We want to always be careful removing these O-rings to where that we do not damage them. Then we have a O-ring in this center location as well. This makes the seal of the air around the back portion of our purge rod assembly. Okay. We don't want to cook these O-rings because the solvent will swell them up, damage them, then they will be unusable. So now disassembly of this rear safety. Sometimes I did not pre-loosen these, and normally they're just a little bit above hand tight, so we always want to use caution with these parts because they are expensive to replace if we damage them. Need just a little bit of additional, there we go, not much. Again, I just keep them just a little bit above hand tight. That's all. We don't need to put gorilla hands on them and tighten them tighter than what they need to be. So again, we'll disassemble this part. We have our spring. This is our spring return for our safety switch, okay? This part is now ready to be cooked because we have the 2 O-rings removed. Our spring. And again, it goes between this piece and this piece, okay? Got a gun in one time, and I found this spring inside of here. It's not where it goes. Now we can remove our safety switch. So this outer ring, retainer ring, it's ready. It can now be cooked. Our safety. This area here during use can get a lot of buildup of overspray. You can also create a problem with engaging and disengaging the safety at times due to the overspray. So if we need to cook this portion, we never want to drop this red ring into our solvent. It will absorb the solvent and it will swell and it will become unusable. Good thing is that it is a split ring, so it can be pretty easily removed from this part. Okay, now we have it separated. This part now is ready to be cooked. And that is the disassembly of the mechanical purge fusion gun. Very simple gun. And there's a lot of parts here. We will go up over the check valves here later before when we go to put them back in. I do like to cook these, especially the A side check valve. Remove our screen. And I will also remove our O-rings. Again, we don't want to soak these O-rings in solvent. And we also want to be careful removing these O-rings because we don't want to damage them. And we'll only replace them when needed. So this check valve is ready to be cooked inside of our cooker. One thing that I will do, especially on the A side check valve, again, I remember our A side check valve, that is our problem side. That side of the operating system gives us the most problem because of the moisture sensitivity of the A side material. I do like to take these check valves apart to make sure that everything is good and clean. So we have our retainer, and we have our spring. Then we have our check ball. This check ball is what's helping protect our, in the event of a crossover, from keeping the material from back flushing into our gun manifold and into our whip line. So we want to make sure that this check valve is in good operating condition. We just want to check it out, make sure that that ball is good and clean. If it's not, we can take a good rag, clean it, take a little bit of solvent. We may want to take a little brush, clean the inside of this check valve body up good. Take our nylon bristle brush, a good stiff bristle brush, and clean with some solvent. Just make sure that this check valve is in good operating condition. Again, we want to make sure that everything on the gun is working correctly. Drop that ball back in. We don't want to lose it. Reassemble our check valve. I take and just run down to about the very first thread. Okay? So this check valve is in good condition, ready to go back into our gun, other than putting our O-rings back into place. And again, if I notice any O-rings that are damaged, I go ahead and replace them. Gun screen back on. So we got our B side and our A side check valves. So that's the complete disassembly of this gun. Our parts that we would cook would be these parts here, and then our check valves if needed. Okay. Now reassembly of this gun is quite simple. Very, very simple. Let's go ahead. Let's start back with our safety. Put our red ring back on. Again, if we see red, we know that gun will fire if it's pressurized up and has air on that. So we always want to have these guns, even whenever my guns are just setting off to the side, not even hooked up, these guns are always on safety. It's just a habit that I have formed up over the years, and I always like to keep my guns on safety. It's very good to get familiar with your gun before you use them. You get familiar with the O-rings, the placement of those O-rings, the pieces and parts of that gun, so that when your gun does give you some trouble, it enables you to be able to troubleshoot that gun and get that gun back up to working more quickly. Reinstall our O-rings. Okay. Again, this spring goes into this section. Doesn't go into the air cylinder. Hand tight. That piece is all ready to go back. Now we can go ahead, let's go ahead with their air spool valve. A little bit of gun grease here. Good to keep these O-rings well lubricated. Doesn't take a lot. While I'm looking at this right quickly, I will say on these air spool valves, if you didn't already know, these air spool valves does have a passageway right in the very back. There's a passageway. Then we also have two orifices here. Okay, they need to be open. They're very vital to the correct operation of this gun. There's another passageway. I want to make sure that they're open and that everything is working correctly. That way our gun triggers on and off as it should. Ease that back in. I'll take just on the back side and just push it forward. Take our air spool spring. And again, I don't over tighten these parts. I will use a crescent wrench. My hand strength is a little weak, and just a little snug. Just a little snug. That's all. Again, I'm going to lubricate these O-rings up. That's the life of them. Okay, ready to install their piston. Again, we have a keyway. That flat portion here on their piston. We want to make sure that it's correct and that our piston goes into our gun housing. Now that we have our piston in, now we can put the back portion of our gun housing back on. Remember, we've installed our O-rings. Okay. Go ahead and put our inner fluid housing O-ring back into place. And again, we want to use caution when we're using any type of tools for removing and installing these O-rings, not to damage them, not to cut them or nick them. So now we're ready for our fluid housing. And again, mention the rear rod purge seal. This is our rear rod. This is the rear rod purge seal housing right here, and then our rear rod purge seal is actually, so if I can get it out, there it comes. So that is the rear rod purge seal. It's the secondary one. Again, we have one in the front and one in the rear. Okay. From time to time, it needs to be tightened up. Again, if it's loose and leaking, it's going to only leak B-side material out of the back portion of this gun. Take our nut driver, and we'll just take it and just tighten it up finger tight. Okay. Now, before we install the fluid housing back onto our gun body, we take our fluid housing, we turn it around backwards. So our gun body and our fluid housing is facing each other. We insert the purge rod through the rear rod seal, like so. Just like so. Okay. Supporting our gun body and our fluid housing, we'll take our nut driver and we'll tighten it up. Just good twist, just to ensure that we have a nice tight fit of the rear rod purge seal onto our purge rod. Once we've got that good and snug, okay, that is the proper adjustment of our rear rod purge seal. Now we can take and put our other O-ring onto our fluid housing. Okay, that's all ready. We'll go ahead and install our clean out air adjustment valve. Reinstall that into our fluid housing. Okay. Now we're ready to reinstall the fluid housing onto the gun body correctly. Push it on. Take our, make sure everything presses in, fits in correctly. Again, just nice, snug, hand tight. Okay. Now we're ready for our module. Always want to ensure that our module is good and clean. We want to take our drill bit or our pin vise, and I have these already set up for my jobs. Here on this this preceding side here would be my number 40 drill bit for my 40 thousandths tip to clean it. Then on this other side, opposite side, is my 29 thousandths drill bit, so I can properly drill my module. One thing about these drill bits is they are not labeled on what size that they are. So, and some of these drill bits gets very small, especially when you're dealing with like 13 thousandths, 16 thousandths. This one here is a 29 thousandths. So what I always try to do is always keep a good slide rule caliper, digital preferably, and I always want to ensure that my drill bit is of the correct size. Because these modules are a carbaloy plastic, and you can oversize them if you use the wrong size drill bit. So we just want to ensure that these drill bits that we are using to drill these modules out are of the correct size. Again, they are not labeled, so I always try to have my pin vices set up beforehand with the appropriate size drill bit. I only use just enough drill bit to get the job done. I don't like have a lot of drill bit sticking outside of the pin vise. It's just not needed for these modules. So again, our front orifice, this front area on this module, this is our A-side component material passageway. I want to just ensure that that A-side port is good and drilled out. And then our back side, this is on this back side area. Again, if the rear rod purge seal leaks, it's going to leak B-side material. It's because the B-side material is on the back portion of this module here. And then I want to drill out and make sure that the B-side orifice is good and clean. Okay. So now we can go ahead and install our module in. To our gun, we'll put our module retainer. Again, I just go hand tight, take my crescent wrench or a adjustable wrench, just give it just a little snug. Okay, take my front rod purge seal, install it back on, take my tip, place that on, tip retainer, again, just good, snug, hand tight. Now my air cap is all ready to go back on. So now all that's left remaining is going to be our check valves. And I always like to put a little bit of grease, gun grease, good white white lithium based grease on their check valves. I always like to right on that O-ring right there. Make sure that it's got enough grease on it. Let's install their resin or B-side check valve in. And again, we've got our A side listed. On the opposite side here, we've got res. On this other gun I have, it's blank. It doesn't have nothing showing on it. So it really depends on what time that you bought the gun. But this particular model here, it's got the A up on the left, nothing on the right. This other gun, it's a little older gun, and it's got A side labeled on the left and res labeled on the right. Again, pays to know your gun. I always tell people that's buying these guns brand new, first thing to do when you get your gun, take it apart. Take the owner's manual, disassemble that gun. It's a lot easier to disassemble it when it's brand new, knowing that nothing has never been run through that gun. Get familiar with the parts and the locations of each and every one of those parts before you go out and use that gun. Okay, now we have our check valves inside of place. We've got the gun reassembled. Now all we have to do is adjust the purge rod. We have to adjust the valving rod or the purge rod. Very simple to adjust this valving rod. To adjust the valving rod, we need our 5/16 nut driver and we need air. You cannot adjust the valving rod without air being on this gun. Remember, there's no spring inside of this cylinder here to drive this valving rod forward when the air is shut off, like on the older GX7s. This gun here, if you're spraying and you have this gun triggered and you lose air to this gun will continue to spray. You can release the trigger, the gun will continue to spray. So, again, there's no return spring in this gun to shut this fluid off. And again, we need air on the gun to enable to properly adjust the valving rod. So, we have our air hooked up to our gun. Now, our cylinder is fully forward inside of the cylinder chamber. We'll take our nut driver with our gun on safety, take our air nut driver, and we'll twist and turn until our valving rod stops. Okay? Turn it just till it stops. Now we know that the valving rod is fully forward and it's fully seated in the back section of our tip. Once we've done that, we'll just back it off just a little bit. Book says about 1/8 of a turn. I just like to just relieve some pressure off of it. Works great for me. Never a problem with it. That's all there is to adjusting the valving rod on this mechanical purge fusion gun. Very simple. And hopefully I've showed you something inside of this video that enables you to work with this gun a lot easier. Main thing, get to know your guns. Very important. The more that you know about them, the easier it is to troubleshoot them. Use them out in the field or inside of your shop. Another little trick on these guns, anytime I'm out in the field or shop spraying and I need to replace my tip, we'll remove our air cap. We will remove our tip retainer. So now I remove our tip. I need to replace it. It's dirty, okay? So I've got my tip off. I'll go ahead, take my nut driver, just back off the valving rod a couple of turns, okay? Now I got my tip cleaned up, ready to go back on. I reinstall my tip. I take my tip retainer, I tighten it up, nice snug hand tight. reinstall my air cap. Okay, now I take my gun on safety, take my nut driver, and I readjust the valving rod. Now my valving rod is adjusted. My gun is now ready to go back to spraying. Very simple. So hopefully again you've got something from this little demonstration of the mechanical purge fusion gun. Again, this is my go-to gun probably 90% of the time on everything that I spray. This is the gun that I use. One of the characteristics about this gun here is it atomizes with a very fine droplet. Okay, if you are familiar with the air purge gun, that gun will atomize with a larger droplet, the AP Fusion gun. It will atomize with a larger droplet. The MP Fusion, it atomizes with a finer, smaller droplet. Thus, one of the characteristics with this gun is it is going to create more overspray than the AP Fusion gun will. Okay, so that's just one of the characteristics of this gun here. It will give you a little better physical properties, been shown with various polyureas, that it will make a little better physicals opposed over the air purge guns due to that finer droplet, just getting a little better of a complete mix. And again, this is my go-to gun. I hope that you've got something from this video again, and if I can ever assist you in any way with any of these types of guns, feel free to contact me at any time. At the end of this video will be my contact information. Thank you and have a good day.